The public is often fascinated by the extravagant funerals of public figures, but the final farewell for El Mencho would redefine the very concept of posthumous opulence. The scene included a giant rooster sculpted entirely from roses, with the initials CJNG carved into its crest, surrounded by over 30 massive floral arrangements. Each arrangement contained 1,000 white roses, flanking a gold-plated coffin valued at more than the average home. The security detail was a spectacle in itself, involving military helicopters and dozens of armored vehicles. This was not merely a funeral. This was the burial of a cartel king, an event so significant that the Mexican government was forced to deploy its military to prevent the ceremony from erupting into open warfare. An analysis of the expenditures for the Jalisco New Generation Cartel's final tribute to their leader reveals figures that are, by any measure, staggering. To understand the event, one must first understand the man, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, better known as El Mencho. He was not just another cartel leader. He was the architect of the most powerful criminal organization in Mexico, and in death, his funeral became a brazen exhibition of wealth and power that astonished even government officials long accustomed to narco excess. For those unfamiliar with the name El Mencho, it is critical to grasp the scale of his enterprise. This man built the Jalisco New Generation Cartel from a regional faction into a billion-dollar empire, controlling narcotics trafficking routes that span nations. Born in 1966 in Michoacán, Mexico, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes began as a small-scale avocado farmer who transitioned into marijuana cultivation before seizing control of what would become the CJNG. But to call him a simple drug dealer would be to call Jeff Bezos a mere bookseller. El Mencho was the chief executive of a multinational criminal corporation. El Mencho's moniker, El Señor de los Galos, the Lord of the Roosters, originated from his deep involvement in cockfighting, a source of his initial capital before his pivot to narcotics trafficking. The rooster evolved into his personal symbol, a chilling trademark. When the CJNG carried out an execution, rooster feathers were often left at the scene as a calling card. This is why the colossal rooster made of roses at his funeral was not simply a decoration. It was the emblem of his entire criminal dynasty. By the time he died, El Mencho had a $10 million bounty on his head from the DEA, making him one of the most wanted fugitives in the world. His cartel controlled the flow of narcotics from South America, through Mexico, and deep into the United States, moving cocaine, fentanyl, methamphetamine, and heroin in quantities that generated billions of dollars annually. But more than its financial success, the CJNG became infamous for its extreme violence and its open warfare against both rival cartels and the Mexican state itself. What distinguished El Mencho from other cartel leaders was his application of military strategy to organized crime. While other organizations remained focused primarily on trafficking, El Mencho forged the CJNG into a paramilitary unit equipped with armored vehicles, helicopters, and a weapons arsenal that rivaled that of many sovereign nations. His organization did not just sell drugs. They governed territories, levied taxes on legitimate businesses, and functioned as a shadow state in regions of Mexico where the central government's authority had collapsed. The man was also known for a formidable intelligence and a capacity for strategic thinking. In contrast to the ostentatious cartel leaders who courted attention on social media, El Mencho operated from the shadows. Rarely photographed and almost never issuing public statements, he allowed his actions to communicate for him. And those actions included declaring war on rival syndicates and launching direct assaults on Mexican military convoys, all while constructing a criminal empire that, at its zenith, generated an estimated $50 billion in annual revenue. The narrative then shifts to March 2, 2026, the day that transformed the CJNG and set the stage for the most expensive cartel funeral in Mexican history. According to Mexican intelligence sources, El Mencho had been suffering from kidney failure for several months prior to his death. The man who had evaded capture for more than a decade, who had survived numerous military operations intended to eliminate him, and who had constructed one of the most powerful criminal organizations on Earth, was ultimately brought down by his own physiology. The official report states that Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes died of natural causes linked to complications from chronic kidney disease, but it was the circumstances of his death that truly captured the attention of investigators. He did not die in a remote mountain hideout or a fortified underground bunker, as one might expect, According to sources embedded in the investigation, El Mencho died in a private medical facility in Mexico City, where he had been receiving dialysis treatment under a false identity. His body was not immediately identified. For approximately 48 hours after he expired, not even the highest levels of Mexican law enforcement knew that the most wanted man in their country was dead. The medical clinic had been treating a patient registered under the name Carlos Ramirez. It was not until his fingerprints were processed through a federal database that authorities realized they possessed the body of El Mencho. What truly unsettled investigators was the manner in which the body was finally identified. It was a routine inspection at the medical facility that ultimately led to the discovery. But by then, the gears of the CJNG machine were already turning, setting in motion a plan to claim the body of their fallen leader. What Mexican intelligence would later uncover was chilling. The cartel had a meticulous protocol for this exact scenario. They knew their leader's health was failing, and for months, they had been preparing for the day he would fall. For the Mexican government, the moment presented a profound and immediate dilemma. On one side of the equation, they had finally captured a ghost, one of the most wanted men in the world. On the other, they understood that El Mencho's death was a spark that could ignite a devastating war for succession within the CJNG. The handling of his corpse, they knew, could determine whether that transfer of power would be orderly or savagely violent. Intelligence dispatches from that period show that within hours of confirmation of his death, CJNG cells began to mobilize across a number of Mexican states. Phone intercepts crackled with coded conversations about bringing the boss home, about preparing for the most significant event in the cartel's history. It became terrifyingly clear to officials that this wasn't just about the death of one man. They were standing on the precipice of a full-blown crisis of national security. The very location where he drew his last breath revealed a crucial truth about how El Mencho had lived out his final, fading months. The medical facility was exclusive, operating under a veil of absolute discretion. It provided care for the wealthy and powerful, bound by a strict code of confidentiality. This was no back-alley chop shop. This was a sanctuary for Mexico's elite, and somehow, the country's most hunted man had been receiving treatment right under their noses. Federal authorities would later confirm that El Mencho had been shielded by a labyrinth of false identities, moving between various private clinics for months. His crippling kidney disease had severely restricted his movement. It was a brutal irony. The very illness that was killing him had also made him invisible, frustrating the world's most sophisticated tracking technology. The medical staff, when questioned by investigators, remembered a man named Carlos Ramirez, a quiet patient who paid his substantial bills in cash and drew no attention to himself. They had no concept that they were treating the architect of Mexico's most violent criminal enterprise. Once his true identity was exposed, a wave of cold fear washed over them. Several employees of the facility required police protection, trapped in a dangerous new reality where they feared retaliation from the cartel or its bloodthirsty rivals. But in the delicate matter of El Mencho's remains, the Mexican government made a decision that stunned law enforcement agencies across the globe. They opted to release the body to his family, surrendering a powerful piece of evidence and leverage against the sprawling CJNG network. According to sources embedded deep within the Mexican Attorney General's office, this was a calculated move, not a surrender. It followed a series of intense, closed-door meetings between military commanders, intelligence chiefs, and cabinet ministers, all of them weighing the catastrophic potential of every possible action. The single, overriding concern was the prevention of a bloody power struggle inside the CJNG. Intelligence briefs showed a fractured organization, with multiple factions already maneuvering to seize control of the empire. Government analysts believed that withholding the body would act as a catalyst, igniting immediate violence as lieutenants fought for the symbolic right to claim their former leader. The Mexican state was also contending with immense pressure from El Mencho's family. His wife, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, was herself a powerful and influential figure who managed the cartel's vast financial apparatus. Intercepted communications revealed she was making direct, chilling threats against government officials. She promised severe retaliation if her husband's body was not released for what she deemed a proper burial. The decision, when it came, was paired with strict conditions. The family would be solely responsible for the transport and burial logistics. The funeral was restricted to pre-approved locations, and Mexican security forces would maintain a constant, visible perimeter throughout the entire process. The government's message was unmistakable. You can have the body, but we will be a shadow over everything you do with it. What truly unsettled the authorities was the intelligence they were gathering on the sheer scale of the planned funeral. The intercepted chatter described what the CJNG was billing as the greatest funeral in the history of Mexico, with invitations going out to cartel members in multiple countries. This would be no somber private service. This was being orchestrated as a brazen exhibition of the cartel's immense power and wealth. Deeper analysis by Mexican intelligence revealed that the CJNG had been rehearsing El Mencho's funeral for months prior to his death. They possessed meticulous logistical blueprints, advanced security protocols, and a series of backup locations should authorities attempt to intervene. The degree of planning and organization was almost unbelievable, rivaling the state funerals typically reserved for national leaders. The transfer of the body from the capital to Guadalajara transformed into a tense, high-stakes security operation. Mexican authorities insisted that the hearse be escorted by a convoy of military vehicles. They established a gauntlet of checkpoints along the entire route, designed to thwart any potential ambush or any attempt by rival cartels to hijack the grim procession. As the body was in transit, intelligence chatter intensified, signaling that multiple criminal syndicates were on the move. For some rival cartels, El Mencho's death was a window of vulnerability, a chance to strike at CJNG operations while the organization was consumed by funerary rites. For others, the funeral itself presented a chilling opportunity, a single location where they could potentially decapitate the CJNG leadership in one swift blow. The Mexican government's decision to permit the funeral, however, was a calculated move, serving its own intelligence objectives. They understood that El Mencho's final rites would act as a magnet, drawing in the CJNG's high command from every corner of Mexico and possibly from abroad. This gathering presented an unparalleled chance to identify and begin tracking key figures who typically operated deep within the shadows. And before we delve deeper, it's worth considering the central question. How, precisely, did the CJNG manage to spend over $1 million to bury their leader with the ceremony of a monarch? The funeral of El Mencho was never about mere expense. It was a meticulously crafted projection of wealth and dominance, a message aimed at rival cartels, the government, and the CJNG's own ranks, asserting the organization's enduring power, even in the vacuum left by its leader's death. The strategy began with the choice of venue. The CJNG selected Funeraria Funerales La Paz, situated in Colonia San Andreas, Guadalajara. While not the city's most opulent funeral parlor, its location was strategic, deep inside a territory where the cartel's influence was absolute. The facility itself was unassuming, but the cartel's expenditure to convert it into a veritable shrine for El Mencho was beyond comprehension. The floral budget alone could have purchased a fleet of luxury vehicles. According to intelligence from Ellen Marshall and reports by Mexico News Daily, the cartel procured numerous coronas, each overflowing with between 500 and 1,000 white roses. Yet this was merely the prelude. They also commissioned bespoke floral creations that were less like arrangements and more like installations of symbolic art. The focal point was a colossal rooster constructed entirely from roses, with white accents and the CJNG initials emblazoned across the top. This was not a simple bouquet, it was a 6-foot-tall sculpture assembled from thousands of individual blooms. Each flower was painstakingly placed by master florists, who were allegedly compensated at a premium for their work under such tense and unorthodox conditions. The rooster sculpture, by itself, was estimated to cost between $15,000 and $25,000, a figure that doesn't account for the security detail required to protect the artisans who built it. Aztec Noticias reported that the rooster was a deliberate homage to El Mencho's moniker, El Señor de los Gallos, and was rendered with such intricate detail that it served as an unmistakable CJNG emblem, visible from anywhere in the room. The skill required to sculpt a lifelike rooster from flowers is highly specialized, and sources with knowledge of the arrangements confirmed that the cartel flew in florists from other cities exclusively for this task. But the rooster was just one of dozens of such massive displays. Intelligence suggests there were 20 to 30 large coronas, each laden with 500 to 1,000 roses. Using a conservative estimate of $2 to $5 per premium stem in Mexico, and factoring in the labor for creations of this scale, the total expenditure on flowers alone easily fell between $50,000 and $150,000. One arrangement stood out, bearing a message that read, "From a family that will always be grateful." Mexico News Daily noted it was positioned directly beside the casket. This particular tribute was composed entirely of red roses, styled to appear as if the words were written in blood, a macabre and unambiguous nod to the violent foundation of El Mencho's empire and the unwavering loyalty he commanded even after death. The casket was another significant outlay, one that reportedly astounded seasoned professionals in the funeral trade. A standard burial coffin in Mexico costs around 7,500 pesos, or roughly $375, according to Statista. El Mencho's casket was said to be gold-plated, with a price tag somewhere between $5,000 and $15,000. Yet some intelligence suggests the actual cost was far higher, potentially nearing $200,000 if it contained a substantial amount of solid gold rather than simple plating. The casket was a bespoke piece, featuring custom engravings, luxurious interior fabrics, and specialized hardware, making it both a monument and a burial vessel. Anonymous sources within the funeral industry revealed that a custom casket of this caliber normally takes months to construct, which implies the CJNG had been methodically planning the logistics of El Mencho's funeral long before he died. The cost of transportation was also a major factor. The remains had to be moved overland from Mexico City to Guadalajara, a journey that demanded a specially outfitted hearse protected by a security convoy reported to be miles long. The CJNG spared no expense on premium transportation services, which included sophisticated refrigeration to preserve the body and climate-controlled vehicles designed to transport the immense floral tributes without a single petal being bruised. The ground itself represented another staggering line item. El Mencho's final resting place was a cemetery in San Juan de Ocotan within the Zapopan municipality. A plot sources confirmed was in a highly sought-after, prime section of the grounds. A premium burial plot in a location like this can command a price anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000. But the CJNG went further, reportedly acquiring an entire section of the cemetery, a move designed to guarantee absolute privacy and security for the grave. Yet, what truly inflated the final tally were the memorial and reception services. The CJNG arranged for a constant supply of food and drink for the hundreds of individuals who came to pay their respects. This assembly included cartel operatives who had journeyed from every corner of Mexico and possibly from beyond its borders. This was far from a simple gathering. What unfolded was a multi-day affair demanding a catering operation with the capacity to sustain a small army, all while preserving the impenetrable security and secrecy essential for a conclave of the cartel. The expenditures for private security were astronomical. While the Mexican government established a military cordon around the event's perimeter, the CJNG deployed its own security apparatus to shield the funeral from the ever-present threat of attack by rival organizations. Insiders placed the cost of this private security detail somewhere between $20,000 and $50,000, a figure that covered armored vehicles, heavily armed personnel, and sophisticated communications gear. What truly alarmed Mexican authorities was the sheer scale of the security apparatus needed to keep El Mencho's funeral from erupting into a war zone between competing cartels. According to reports from El Imparcial, the area was swarmed by dozens of military vehicles, while a helicopter maintained a constant, watchful orbit overhead. This was no standard police detail. This was a full-scale military mobilization, drawing units from the Mexican Army, the National Guard, and the state police. The government was, in effect, managing El Mencho's funeral as a potential threat to national security, which it unequivocally was. A security perimeter radiated for blocks around the funeral home, with heavily manned checkpoints established to scrutinize every vehicle that attempted to enter the sealed-off zone. Mexico News Daily noted that the security presence was so overwhelming that civilian traffic was rerouted from the entire neighborhood for the whole duration of the proceedings. Intelligence chatter confirmed that the government was acting on credible threats, indicating that rival cartels, with the Sinaloa cartel being a primary concern, were actively weighing the possibility of launching attacks during the funeral. The chance to decapitate the CJNG leadership in a single, devastating strike was a prize too tempting for some to ignore. Mexican authorities were acutely aware that any outbreak of violence at the funeral could ignite a cartel war that would quickly spiral out of control and spread across numerous states. The helicopter surveillance was not merely for appearances. It served as an active intelligence hub, monitoring communications and meticulously tracking the movements of known cartel figures on the ground. Government officials would later admit they successfully identified dozens of high-ranking CJNG operatives in attendance, an intelligence windfall that would prove invaluable in future operations against the syndicate. The unprecedented nature of this security operation was its core paradox. The Mexican government was, for all intents and purposes, providing protection for a cartel funeral. Their objective was not to make arrests or to interfere with the ceremony. Their mission was to ensure the funeral concluded without bloodshed. This marked a chillingly pragmatic strategy for managing the cartels, a strategy that critics condemned as the state lending its security apparatus to organized crime. The total cost of this government security mission has never been officially released. However, estimates suggest it drew upon hundreds of personnel and consumed millions of pesos in state resources. Helicopter flights alone can run into the thousands of dollars per hour. And this military deployment included specialized units normally reserved for counterterrorism scenarios. To truly grasp the scale of Elno's funeral costs, one must compare it to the CJNG's typical expenditure for a fallen soldier. According to internal documents reported by El Gráfico, CJNG expense logs revealed an allocation of around 25,000 pesos, roughly $1,250, for the funeral of a low-level sicario, known only by the alias Muchacho de Day. This figure provides a crucial baseline for what the cartel deemed a suitable funeral expense for its rank-and-file gunmen. So, for a common foot soldier, the CJNG would spend $1,250. For El Mencho, they spent a sum approaching $1 million. That represents an 800-fold surge in funeral spending, a testament not only to the leader's significance, but also to the cartel's profound need to project its enduring wealth and dominance, even in the wake of his death. The comparison becomes even more jarring when you realize that countless Mexican families live in homes that cost less than what the CJNG spent solely on flowers for Elno's funeral. In a country where the average worker earns approximately $15,000 a year, the flower budget alone consumed the equivalent of 3 to 10 years of an ordinary citizen's wages. Based on every available report and the known costs of luxury funeral services in Mexico, let's dissect precisely where that $1 million was allocated, and how the CJNG orchestrated a final farewell more expensive than what most people earn in a lifetime. It began with the casket, a vessel that was reportedly plated in gold and custom-built exclusively for Eleno. In Mexico, a typical burial casket runs about 7,500 pesos, a sum equivalent to roughly $375, according to official figures. But the coffin built for Eleno existed in an entirely different reality. Even the most conservative appraisals placed its value somewhere between $5,000 and $15,000. Yet, inside sources whispered of a far more staggering figure, suggesting a cost that could have climbed as high as $200,000. The vast discrepancy hinges on a single, chilling detail: whether the casket was merely plated or contained solid gold. But when you consider the cartel's immense wealth and the symbolic weight of this final farewell, the higher number becomes hauntingly plausible. It was in the floral tributes, however, that the CJNG's display of power reached its zenith. An expenditure so vast it would seem pathological to an ordinary person, all for a spectacle designed to wilt and die within days. The colossal, custom-made rooster arrangement, a singular piece in a sea of tributes, commanded a price between $15,000 and $25,000. And it was just the beginning. The order also included 20 to 30 enormous funeral wreaths, each one constructed from 500 to 1,000 premium roses. The calculus is grim, with premium stems in Mexico costing $2 to $5 apiece, and factoring in the specialized artistry required for such complex, monumental designs. The total budget for flowers alone soared to between $50,000 and $150,000. This is a fortune that many Mexican families will never see in a lifetime. Incinerated on flora destined for decay, the mortuary services accounted for another layer of expense, though it was almost a footnote compared to the other displays of wealth. The CJNG paid a sum between $3,000 and $8,000. This secured the wake and viewing services, the meticulous preparation and embalming of the body, and the coordination of transport. It also rented the facility itself, complete with specialized staff who understood the protocols of such a gathering. The fee wasn't just for services. It was for silence for handling a funeral of this magnitude while maintaining the absolute discretion a cartel event demands. For his final resting place, Elena was interred at a prime location in a cemetery in San Juan de Ocotan, within the Zapopan municipality. A premium burial plot in this district can command a price from $10,000 to $30,000. But intelligence suggests the CJNG went further, purchasing an entire section of the cemetery to guarantee absolute privacy and security. This was not the act of buying a grave. It was a strategic acquisition, a move to control the very ground where their fallen leader would lie. The logistics of transportation were also a significant undertaking. A clandestine operation to move Elena's body from Mexico City to Guadalajara. Between $2,000 and $5,000 was allocated for specialized hearse services, the coordination of a security convoy, and the refrigeration equipment essential to preserving the remains on the long journey. An entirely separate fleet of vehicles was required simply to transport the monumental flower arrangements without inflicting the slightest damage. The memorial services themselves resembled a multi-day summit requiring provisions for hundreds of mourners. These were not just family. They were cartel operatives who had traveled from every corner of Mexico and possibly from beyond its borders. An estimated $10,000 to $20,000 was spent on food, beverages, and the rental of venues capable of hosting a gathering of this scale under the immense pressure of cartel security protocols. But it was the private security detail that constituted one of the most formidable expenses. The CJNG deployed its own forces, a shadow army operating independently of the government military cordon. This operation cost between $20,000 and $50,000, a price that included legions of armed personnel, armored vehicles, and sophisticated communication systems, all seamlessly integrated with the cartel's existing security infrastructure. Such measures were critical. While the state provided a perimeter, the true threat came from within the underworld, from rival organizations looking for an opportunity to strike. Finally, a host of miscellaneous costs, from custom memorial artifacts to the careful photographic documentation of the event, added another $5,000 to $15,000 to the ledger. When the final accounting is done, the numbers are staggering. A deeply conservative estimate places the total cost between $15,000 and $478,000. But a more realistic assessment, reflecting the true nature of the event, pushes the upper limit toward $1 million, cementing its legend as Elena's million-dollar funeral. The fallout from the funeral would prove to be as revealing about the CJNG's future as the ceremony was about its present power. In the weeks that followed, intelligence channels began to crackle with reports of escalating violence across several Mexican states. Various factions inside the CJNG had begun a savage war for the organization's most lucrative territories. The million-dollar spectacle, intended as a projection of unity, may have instead served as a bloody advertisement, illuminating the vast prize they were now fighting to claim. For the Mexican authorities, the intelligence they harvested during the funeral became the blueprint for a series of major operations against the CJNG. The government's gamble to permit the funeral to proceed had paid off. By maintaining a wall of heavy surveillance around the event, they had succeeded in identifying key cartel figures who had long operated in the shadows. A wave of arrests in the months after Elena's death could be traced directly back to the intelligence gathered as the cartel mourned. The funeral also sent ripples through the entire landscape of Mexico's criminal underworld. Rival organizations had been watching, taking careful note of both the sheer scale of Elena's farewell and the government's calculated clinical response. To some observers, it was a clear signal. An organization with enough money and muscle could dictate terms to the state, negotiating the very framework of its criminal enterprise. Law enforcement agencies across the globe took notice. The funeral was a case study in how modern syndicates function less like street gangs and more like multinational corporations. The meticulous planning, the seamless organization, and the vast financial outlay revealed that the CJNG operated with a logistical sophistication that could go head-to-head with any legitimate global business. But the funeral's shockwaves traveled far beyond the confines of the criminal underworld. Deep inside Mexican communities, especially in regions under the CJNG's heavy influence, the event was understood as a display of an alternate power, a shadow government that delivered where the official state often failed. Despite official attempts to suppress the story, images of the funeral flooded social media, igniting a fierce public debate about the nation's deep-seated inequality. The comparison was impossible to ignore. A narco-trafficker was being laid to rest with more pageantry than many of the nation's own presidents. a grim testament to the chasm between the wealth of organized crime and the state itself. The ceremony also served to cement the mythology surrounding both the man and his organization. Instead of his death signaling a decline, the spectacle was absorbed into the cartel's legend, becoming a powerful recruitment tool, a dark promise of glory for anyone looking to follow in his footsteps. For the countless families torn apart by cartel violence, the leader's million-dollar send-off was a grotesque spectacle, a painful reminder of the immense resources wielded by their tormentors. While the families of victims often struggle to cover the most basic burial costs for their loved ones, the architect of their suffering was interred with a level of opulence few could even fathom. The leader's million-dollar funeral was never just about burying a cartel boss. It was a raw display of the staggering wealth and influence that modern criminal empires can amass, and a window into the twisted symbiosis between these syndicates and the very governments tasked with their destruction. That Mexican authorities not only permitted the funeral, but also provided security for it, speaks to a chilling pragmatism, the grim reality of governing in a landscape dominated by cartel power. It was a calculated appeasement, tolerate this small demonstration of criminal power to stave off a much larger explosion of violence. For the CJNG, the funeral achieved its primary objective, a public declaration of continued strength, a message that the empire would endure even without its king. But such a brazen display was a double-edged sword, attracting intensified government scrutiny and reportedly fueling internal power struggles that would fracture the cartel in the months to come. The legacy of this event would rewrite the playbook for how the next generation of narco commanders plan for their own demise and how governments react when they fall. It established a new precedent for the sheer scale of symbolic power plays and the degree of state accommodation that might be required to keep a fragile peace. When you spend close to $1 million on a funeral, you are not merely putting a body in the ground. You are forging a statement about power, about wealth, and about the persistence of an outlaw nation whose resources rival those of legitimate governments. The leader's funeral broadcast to the world the terrifying apex of the CJNG's power, and that spectacle of wealth and control will be remembered long after the last flower has wilted and the security details have moved on. We look at $1 million funeral, a sea of pristine white roses, a gold-plated casket, a spectacle of absolute dominance, and it is dangerously easy to be blinded by the glare of such immense power. But strip away the delicate petals and the staggering pageantry, and what truly remains? A monument built entirely on a foundation of profound human agony. Every golden handle on that coffin, every single stem in that colossal rooster, was purchased with the stolen futures of innocent people. This is the grand, sickening illusion of the narco empire. It broadcasts a dark, seductive myth of kingship and rebellion, intentionally masking the brutal reality that this wealth is harvested from shattered communities. It is paid for by grieving families who cannot even afford a simple, weathered wooden cross for their own murdered children. True power is not terrorizing a nation into submission. True legacy is not a mountain of imported flowers destined to rot in an exclusive cemetery. It is time we stop turning monsters into myths. We must look past the flashy, blood-soaked armor of organized crime and recognize the devastating toll it takes on humanity. True strength belongs to those fighting for a life of honest dignity in the shadow of this violence.